it's Sarah here from BJC Health, coming to you from Sydney, Australia. Thanks for showing an interest in one of our educational events. You're about to watch part one, so enjoy the event. If you've got any questions about the content, then please consider joining BJC Connect, where you can access all of our facilitators live. Otherwise, please consider leaving a comment and we'll do our best to get back to you.
Good evening, everyone. Lovely to see you all and some familiar faces as usual. Thanks, Sarah. So hopefully everyone can see Sarah's slides. Looks like there's a moving slide happening.
That was a fluke. I don't know how I did that, but enjoy that. It's the only tricky slide there is, but I will move it along.
Awesome. Okay. So yeah, really talking about bouncing back to exercise and movement, your physical activity routines after illness. So I thought we'd start with really talking about what happens with the immune system when we get sick. So you can see a sort of a line of defense mechanism there. And it's interesting the way we describe the immune system as, think of it almost like commandos, or a defense line. You've got your military almost. They're really trying to make sure that we can defend the body in a sense, and so it starts with virus entry, or when you get sick. So typically a virus or a cold germ enters the body in some way. So it could be through your nose, through your mouth, your eyes. When you touch something, especially we've been thinking about COVID for a long time now, and really wiping down all surfaces and not trying to transmit germs. So yeah, anything that enters our system can then be contaminated, and then when we touch our face, it then goes into our bodies. So we have to also keep in mind it can travel through the air as well, right? So again, thinking about masks and all that protection. So really the entry point is the first bit. I think we've all gotten very good at being mindful of the entry points. Then we have alarm signals. So our immune system then recognizes these germs or the invaders, and it sends out alarm signals to then call for help. So it's asking our immune system to do something about it. So this is when we might start to feel our first line of symptoms. It might not be so bad. It might be that tickle in the throat. Maybe you're starting to get a little bit of sneezing. Maybe your body's just really starting to feel a little bit tender. And this is when the body's starting to gear up to fight the infection. Okay, so the defense systems are starting to rise. Then we've got the defense mobilization. So now really we're trying to recruit our defense team. So our special immune cells, and typically the white blood cells that you might have heard of, rush to the site of infection. So some of these cells work by swallowing up and invading germs, while some other cells might produce chemicals that then can help fight the infection. You've got antibody production. So basically, the immune system is trying to potentially recognize infectious agents, okay? So the body's then trying to create specific proteins called antibodies, and this is what's recognizing the virus or the cold germ. So typically when you've had a cold before, your immune system has recognized those cells, and normally we might be able to recover from that cold a lot quicker because our body is actually recognizing those antibodies. So these antibodies then stick to the invaders that have entered the system and marking them for destruction by some other immune cells. Then there's the real battle and recovery. So this is like that main battle scene in the movie, but really now the immune system's response can cause inflammation. Okay, so this is probably like the height of when you're sick and maybe you're feeling at your worst. So yes, it can cause inflammation. You might be having a fever. You really might be having the hardcore coughing at this point. And our body is really at the top of the battle scene. So as the immune system then starts to defeat the virus, your symptoms like coughing and sneezing are helping to start clear the germs from your system. Okay, and that's why we cough and that's why we sneeze, because we're trying to actually get rid of those cells. And then that last phase is that memory and protection. So once the infection's over, our immune system is very smart, and it's remembering the virus. So those antibodies that it's produced is really the memory part of our immune system. So if we encounter the same virus again, our body can quickly produce the right antibodies to then fight it off, and hopefully fight it off quicker. And sometimes you might even realize you've got symptoms, but they're not usually as bad as previous times. So sometimes the body can then fight off potential infection without us even realizing it. And maybe, you're not as sick for as long. So hopefully that just helped give us a little bit of a summary of what's happening when we've got some germs entering the body and our body's trying to fight it off. So now if we talk about the immune system response to exercise. So again, there we've got a little bit of a pathway. So when we start to exercise, we can notice there's enhanced circulation of immune cells. And this is what's really awesome. Exercise is a stressor on the body. And what's happening is exercise can start to boost the circulation of immune cells in the body, and it's making it easier for them to patrol and defend against these pathogens. So again, small bouts of exercise and light to moderate bouts of exercise are good for us and are good for our immune system. They're boosting our immune system. We know that there's an association with a reduction in inflammation over time if we have consistent exercise bouts, because they are, it's like the training of the defense system and our defense teams to make sure that they are ready to gear up for battle. We've got stress hormones and immune suppression. So if you have a bit more intense exercise bouts or prolonged exercise, so again, depending on what your baseline is, for some people that might be running for much longer, running half marathons, running marathons, or maybe doing a lot more heavier strength training or more vigorous strength training than usual. You're really pushing yourself in your exercise session. This can lead to an increase in those stress hormones such as cortisol. And we know that typically after those more intense bouts of exercise, there is this window where you are more susceptible to getting sick, right? Because we put the stress on our immune system is low, and we can be more susceptible to pick up those germs, and our immune system just sort of not ready to fight because we've really put a lot of stress on it. We've got exercise-induced immunodepression. Okay, so that's what I was talking about. So after that particularly grueling exercise session, we might experience that temporary decrease in function. But again, the immune system will then ramp up again. And I think it's being mindful of we're not always doing those intense exercise sessions. Hopefully, you might be doing those once in a while, or you might have a bout of doing that. And then we have these periods of recovery, lighter types of exercise. And that's why varying your exercise is also really important. So we're not continually stressing or overstressing the body and having continued low immune function. Awesome. Long-term immune system enhancement. So talking about that exercise over the long period and having those regular bouts of exercise can help, as I said, gear up those defense mechanisms so that in the long term, all the small battles that we have to fight, the immune system is ready to go.
Beautiful. So I guess in summary, Robyn, long-term exercise is good for the immune system. It's a good thing. And I guess, if you've been to many of our talks, I guess we go on about exercise quite a bit, but particularly for anyone tonight who's got an inflammatory condition, or if it's one of your goals or it's something you're very mindful of to be doing things that help your inflammation levels in the long term, then exercise would definitely be something that we put in that category. But I think, it also sort of starts to give you some clues as to the nuances that come with choosing what type of exercise. And like you mentioned, Robyn, it's a stressor. So depending on how you're feeling and at any one point, just being mindful of that intensity. But hopefully that just gives you some insight as to long term, it's a good thing. But then hopefully after tonight, it helps you make some of those shorter term decisions that are right for you, especially if you're recovering after a period of being unwell. So all right, so I guess we wanted to get to sort of the crux of tonight early, not make you sit through the whole thing before you get to the answer. So this is, I guess, the best summary we could come up with, so when we've researched it, and, you know, again, when you read sort of papers and different research articles, they'll all put a slightly different spin on things. But if your illness is mild, so I guess, again, please in your questions, or if you want more nuance depending on your situation, but in this instance, if it's a mild illness, so if you've experienced some mild symptoms, so maybe, you know, the sort of symptoms that would mean you're not feeling at your best, you might need some time off work, or you might need to take a rest from your regular exercise routine, but you're not hospitalized. Okay, so if you're after a mild illness without severe symptoms, individuals can consider, so I've tried to bold all the words that are still, you know, not black and white. You can consider, that just means you can think about it, resuming light exercise a few days after your symptoms resolve. Okay, so I think in the context of like a flu or even COVID, a cough, a cold, again, you're really sort of looking for some of those sorts of symptoms to really have passed before you're thinking about resuming your regular exercise regime. So I'll let that sort of just sit for a sec. And then the second slide is
Sarah, just before you move on, I actually had one of my patients ask me this just this morning. She messaged me saying, oh, I've been a bit unwell. Should I exercise? She was going to join a session with me. And what I said to her, and a really good, I guess, test is if you have symptoms below the neck still. So think you like got that, you know, chesty cough, or you're still feeling shortness of breath, I normally recommend maybe not yet. But if your symptoms are just above the neck, so yes, you might still have a little bit of, you know, snot, a little bit of a cough, but the symptoms aren't down below. I said, if you feel okay too, and you feel like you can do some movement, you're going to be okay. You're probably going to be okay. So that was a really nice meter. And then I let my patient know, I let you decide. And she said, yeah, actually, most of her symptoms were above, but we took it nice and easy today as well. So that might be a nice way if you also want to gauge based on what Sarah said after a mild illness, above the neck or below the neck.
Yeah, that's a good one. Good one, Robyn. And then this one just spoke to if your illness is more severe. So again, definitely if it involves being in hospital for any period, but I think again, a severe illness, that's still quite a broad term that could cover, you know, if you really need bed rest for a considerable period of time, if, you know, for weeks, sometimes months, you feel unable to participate in things, I would classify as that as a more severe illness. You know, whether it's whatever it's called, I think doesn't really matter at that point. But the longer that you're unwell and the more severe your symptoms, the longer the recovery. And I think at that point, again, the advice tends to be like definitely consultation, like talking to your GP, talking to any specialists that might be involved in your care is a good idea to then help you feel confident to resume some exercise. So I think more severe symptoms, longer symptoms tends to be a longer recovery. And then again, I think light is the way to start. And then you can sort of build from there. So, but some other tips, because I think, again, even just those two sort of broad recommendations, there's still, you know, some wriggle room, and we're all quite different. And these are some other things that I think I would like to know, and Robyn would probably want to understand in trying to help someone figure that out in a very individualized way. So returning back to activity, it really depends. I'd really like to know, so if someone said like, can I go back? I'd be like, well, what sort of things do you want to go back to? What were you doing before? So it's very important when we're talking about safety in both starting exercise and resuming exercise, your history is actually very important, and not necessarily, well, your medical history, of course, but your exercise history. And the longer that you're someone who moves in a regular way, your history and your body's capacity to adapt to that training helps inform our future decisions. It's very different if you're just starting exercise for the first time and you've got no experience, because again, we know that your body's got muscle memory. Again, some of the things that you've done in the past are potentially going to be easier to return to, as opposed to starting something that's completely new. So what were you doing pre-illness? What type of activity? What position were you in when you're doing that activity? Was that a weight-bearing activity? Was it a non-weight-bearing activity? Was it a group class? Was it something you could do by yourself? How long did you do that activity for? So lots of questions. Sometimes we're in this point, I'm always conscious that we don't come across like we're interrogating people, but that kind of information is very helpful to then help us guide you in a really practical way. And I think the other thing is all of us do recover a little bit differently. So again, we can give you some guidance tonight, but I think, again, it's all quite relative, and all of our bodies are different and interesting and complex. But again, when you're looking for guidance and how we try and make these good educated decisions about what's safe for you, again, how you responded to things previously is important. So I do have some clients where it's normal for them to feel a bit sore after a session, but they know that that's okay, it passes. They're used to that kind of sensation, where other people, any type of soreness is quite foreign and quite scary. So then again, we're trying to just take all that information into our perspective. And so when you're about to get back into things, I guess we've got to try and consider as well that you might not fully be capable yet to go back to what you were previously doing. And so I think one of the main things to be open to, I'm not necessarily you have to do this all the time, but let's say you're like, hey, my symptoms are gone, or they're pretty much gone, I want to get back out there. I would typically not suggest going right back to something that you were doing pre-illness. Again, that's not to say you can't give that a go, because sometimes that is totally fine. But I normally, especially I think in clients with an inflammatory condition, or again, if you're very mindful of trying to avoid flare-ups and prolonged bouts of, not feeling 100%, then we tend to be a little more conservative. So we need to reestablish what your baseline is. And so baseline just means how much can you do before feeling pretty awful, or before you really feel like that you want to stop. So I would say an approach that I typically start with is just going back to, say, 50% of whatever your previous activity was. So if you were someone who knows that a 40-minute walk would be quite comfortable, let's say you had a walking path around your local area that you're like, I know I can do this. 2 weeks ago, I was able to do that. I would just say, if it's your first walk back, go for 20 minutes. Maybe do half, go half out and then come back. Because I think one of the things that we need to be mindful of when it comes to your recovery is you don't always know at the time. Like, you might get some signals and some sense that, okay, I'm doing too much, but sometimes you don't get that information and those senses till afterwards. So we can't always judge it by how you felt at that time. And I'm sure some of you have experienced like, oh, I felt great at the time, but then the next day I was, not feeling so great. So I tend to go with 50%. It doesn't have to be time. I think the other thing is, because let's say if it's something that you can't control the time, let's say it's a group exercise class, and let's say it's in a facility where, yeah, you'd prefer to actually stay for the class. You could leave halfway, but most people won't want to do that typically. But then you could also go, well, I'm going to go 50% of my normal intensity. So instead of, say, running around the room for the warm-up, I'm going to walk. Instead of doing some of the higher impact options, I'm going to choose the low impact ones. So it's about making active, intentional decisions to bring the intensity down. Okay. And that's, again, going to look slightly different for all of us, depending on the activity and depending on what you were doing before. But I think the key word is it's an intentional decision. It's different to, I'll just go out and see how I go. Again, that's always an option. You can always do that. But I think, again, if you're wanting to be really mindful and a bit more conservative, take it down 50%. Okay. And then that gives you the chance to sort of see not only how you respond whilst you're doing it, but then before you go out and do the same activity again, you can sort of say, did I pull up well afterwards? How did my muscles cope? And some of those signals, as I mentioned, might not be obvious until the next day or the day after. With reestablishing your baseline, I think, again, this is something that you might find helpful. An activity diary can be very helpful. Again, just to help you be mindful and objective about how things actually went. Again, appreciate that, especially after being unwell, like, things might feel okay, but it's good to try and reflect and go, well, what does that mean? Did I have muscle soreness? Was it that I got out of breath? Did I have any other symptoms? The more that you can, again, notate your experience, the more helpful it is, and mostly for yourself, but particularly then if you're working with any other health practitioners, that can help them guide you as well. yeah, and I think with any sort of comeback, and these are good strategies, I think anytime we're exercising, but particularly when you're making a bit of a comeback after being unwell, is just being mindful and aware of the signals that your body will send you, because there's quite a bit going on when we exercise. And yeah, if we're able to remain mindful and be aware of those signals, they can help inform your decision as to whether you keep going, maybe you slow down, maybe you decide to call it quits for the day. Those signals are meant to help inform your decision making. And sometimes we can all be quite what's the word? I don't know. Sometimes we really want to push through and finish what we're set out to finish, or you're like, I'm just going to get to the end of the block before I slow down. But I think if we can remain open and just mindful of those signals, then it can help you, exercise in the best way for your body. So things like your heart rate, your breathing rate, how your muscles are feeling, your tendons. Now tendons, the point where your muscle attaches to the bone. And for some of you who have had tendon issues in the past, you'll know. So I think, again, if you've had previous injuries, if those sorts of things are starting to send you signals, or you can feel that, your foot might be a bit sore, again, that would be something just to be mindful of. And I think overall vibe, that's a bit cheeky putting that there, but I think, I'm happy to share, I don't know if it was, weird timing. I was actually sick a few weeks ago in preparation for this talk, and wasn't COVID, but it was definitely a nasty, coldy, flu-y thing. And I remember, I was definitely sick for a week, no exercise. And then I think on the Sunday, in my usual sort of optimistic self, I was like, right, Monday, I'm back into it. I felt pretty good. But then Monday came, and I think I went back to work and had a pretty full day. And the overall vibe was no, I did not go back to exercise. It took the whole second week until I just had that feeling that I'm like, no, now I'm pretty good. So I think, again, sometimes just that, some of those signals mesh together to just give you that sense of, am I feeling up to it or not? And just some other tips to help you bounce. So again, I think if for whatever reason you feel your pre-illness activities still might be too much, if you're like, oh, I really don't feel up to walking or running, what else can I do? Because sometimes, especially if you have been unwell, and I noticed it in myself this time, you might start to feel stiff, a bit sore, and some of that's just from not being active, and potentially could be the illness itself. But here are a few other tips to remember. So just consider that non-weight bearing or low impact activities will always be less costly to your body in terms of energy, effort, and just the oomph required to complete low impact stuff is less than things that require you to be standing up weight bearing. So that might be doing some stuff lying down. That could be doing some gentle movement in the water. It could be doing a few minutes on an exercise bike. I'd classify that as low impact. So those sorts of activities tend to be, less costly, require less response. And so that can also be a really safe way to get started if you don't want to go straight back to something you were doing before. Different positions can make a big difference as well. So in terms of your heart rate response, and again, just in terms of your energy levels and how much effort we need to do different things in different positions, I've given you just the continuum there. So lying is, lying down on your back or being flat on your stomach, low effort, not too much weight bearing. It's the easiest place to get started, as long as that's comfortable for you. Then kneeling, then seated, then finally standing. Okay. And sometimes just going straight back to standing is okay, but sometimes that might not go so well. And thankfully, even something like resistance training, you can do resistance training in all of those positions. Okay. But you might just need to get a bit creative or get some ideas as to how you can make that work. And speaking to Robyn in preparation for tonight, both of us have had clients, particularly who are recovering from an illness, who have been very sensitive to different positions. And changing positions within the one session can be something that, don't know why, causes, people to not feel so great. So it's definitely been a strategy I've been mindful of if I'm ever giving people programs, that sometimes keeping your, let's say it's a mobility or some kind of resistance training program, keeping it just in one position as opposed to some in kneeling, some in standing, then lying down, that can be another way we can modify things to just be a bit more comfortable for you. And then finally, duration and frequency also really matter. So I think when it comes to trying to build adaptation and get your muscles and tissue responsive to movement, typically, this is a generalization, but typically it's better to do small efforts more frequently than, say, one big effort once a week. So generally our tendons like small incremental changes, so do our muscles. And I think our heart and our cardiovascular system tends to respond in a similar way. And although that might not always be practical, I think that's just worth mentioning that, it doesn't matter how small you might need to start, but we try and string together a few sessions of a similar sort of time and intensity, then look at pushing things up a little bit more. But if you can do things consistently, that tends to be a little bit better, as long as you're giving yourself enough time to recover. Okay, so I've just broken up, and Robyn, I might get you can do the cardiovascular bit, I guess, but there's different ways we can measure our response to exercise. And I guess this isn't a hugely extensive list, but I thought it was worth breaking up just the different ways that you can do it. Some of them might be really obvious and some of them you might not have heard of before. And I've just broken it into different sections, but all of it's important. And it's not to say that you have to monitor your heart rate or you have to do this, but again, I think over time, if you're someone who's invested in exercising, learning to sort of listen to your body and respond to those signals is really important. And we'll just go through a few ways that you can, just be mindful of monitoring how exercise is feeling in your body. So cardiovascular, so that's like heart, lungs, your breathing, and Robyn will take you through a few of these in the next slide.
So you've just finished watching part 1 of one of our recent educational events. Hope you enjoyed the content. If you'd like to access part 2, then you need to sign up for BJC Connect. It's a free platform where you can access not just the recordings of past events, but also access a whole range of upcoming future events and access our team of facilitators live. All of the details that you need to join BJC Connect are now flashing up on your screen. Otherwise, like our staff, subscribe if you'd like to see more information from BJC Health. Look forward to seeing you in an event soon.